After everything you what, Alexander? Olivia's voice cut through the pristine boardroom like a diamond through glass. After you discarded me like I was nothing. After you locked me out of the company I helped build. After you left me starting over at 34 with no home, no references, and a prenup that ensured I got nothing for 6 years of my life. The billionaire who had once ruled this very boardroom sat across from her, speechless for perhaps the first time in his privileged life. I made mistakes, Alexander finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's laugh was cold, devoid of any warmth. Mistakes? Is that what we're calling it now? She leaned forward, amber eyes locked on the man who had once been her world. You gave me a $20,000 check and 2 days to pack my life into suitcases. Now you're sitting in my office, in my tower, begging for a lifeline because the company you threw me out of is drowning. Her perfectly manicured finger tapped the acquisition proposal between them. How does it feel, Alexander, to need something from the woman you once thought was worth nothing? Welcome to Mr. Stevens Stories, where real-life lessons unfold in ways you never imagined. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to rise from absolute rock bottom to stand triumphant over the very person who put you there? Today's story reveals the ultimate comeback, one that will make you believe in justice, second chances, and the unstoppable power of determination. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside, you'll want to stay until the very end to witness a transformation so complete, it will change how you think about success and redemption forever. The boardroom fell silent as Olivia Reed entered. 7 years of carefully cultivated power had given her an aura that commanded attention without a single word. The Louboutins that carried her across Italian marble clicked with quiet authority. Her tailored navy suit, simple but impeccably cut, spoke of the refined taste that had become her trademark. But it was her eyes that made Alexander Hargrove's breath catch in his throat. Those amber eyes, once soft with love, now gleamed like polished steel. Mr. Hargrove, she said, extending a manicured hand across the glossy table. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Alexander stood, grateful that years of business negotiations had trained him to hide the tremor in his fingers. Ms. Reed. He'd rehearsed a dozen greetings, but her professional formality stripped him of every carefully prepared word. Those 2 syllables, Ms. Reed, felt foreign on his tongue. She had been Liv once. His Liv. Before he'd destroyed everything. Shall we begin? Olivia took her seat at the head of the table, the position that had once belonged to him. Her team arranged themselves on either side like a royal court attending their queen. Alexander nodded, lowering himself into the chair that felt oddly small beneath him. Funny how the same furniture could feel different when you were no longer in control. Hargrove Industries is facing a critical juncture, Olivia began, her voice steady and cool as she addressed the room. The proposed acquisition by Phoenix Innovations would inject much-needed capital and technological expertise. Our offer is fair, comprehensive, and time-sensitive. Our offer. Phoenix Innovations. Her company. Alexander watched as the woman he'd once discarded like yesterday's newspaper outlined how she planned to dismantle and absorb the empire he'd spent his life building. An empire that was now crumbling beneath him. The irony wasn't lost on him. 7 years ago, he'd thrown her out of his life with nothing. Today, she held his future in her elegantly manicured hands. We've analyzed your market position, continued Olivia's CFO, a sharp-eyed woman who looked barely 30. The last 8 quarters show a consistent downward trend in both market share and profitability. The presentation continued with brutal efficiency. Charts and graphs displayed on the sleek screens lining the walls told the story of Hargrove Industries' decline in vivid color. Red arrows pointing down. Growth projections slashed through with corrections. Market share represented by an ever-shrinking circle. As you can see, Olivia said, gesturing to a particularly damning slide, without significant intervention, bankruptcy becomes a real possibility within 18 months. Alexander felt the weight of his board members' stares. They knew it was true. He knew it was true. But hearing it stated so plainly, so clinically, by the woman who had once shared his bed and his dreams, that made it unbearable. Our proposal, Olivia continued, either unaware or unconcerned with his discomfort, preserves the Hargrove name on key product lines, retains 60% of your current workforce, and offers shareholders 85 cents on the dollar, significantly more than they'd receive in a liquidation scenario. Reasonable. Fair. Even generous, considering the circumstances. And yet, all Alexander could think was, when did she become this? This polished, confident executive who dismantled failing companies with surgical precision. This woman whose presence dominated a room he had once considered his personal kingdom. Mr. Hargrove? Your thoughts on the timeline? Olivia's voice cut through his reverie. He cleared his throat. The timeline seems aggressive. She raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. We find that efficiency benefits all parties. Your shareholders are eager for a resolution, given the consecutive quarters of declining profits. A subtle reminder of his failure. Of how far he'd fallen while she had soared. We'll need time to review the complete terms, he said, fighting to maintain his composure. Of course. Olivia nodded to her assistant, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. Everything is outlined here. We'll reconvene on Friday for your decision. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Her team began gathering their materials with the synchronized efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Ms. Reed, Alexander said, rising quickly. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. There are nuances to Hargrove Industries that might benefit from a more personal conversation. Those amber eyes studied him, revealing nothing. I'm quite familiar with the nuances of your company, Mr. Hargrove. Even so. My office. 5 o'clock. She turned to leave, then paused. And Alexander? This is business, not personal. I trust you can maintain that distinction. As she walked away, he couldn't help but notice how the boardroom seemed dimmer in her absence. In those moments after Olivia left, Alexander remained frozen, staring at the doorway through which she'd disappeared. His board members exchanged uneasy glances, waiting for direction that didn't come. Alex, Jerome Peterson, his longest-serving board member, finally broke the silence. You never mentioned Ms. Reed was the CEO of Phoenix Innovations. Alexander turned slowly to face him. I didn't know. You didn't know your ex-wife was running the company about to acquire us? Jerome's voice carried equal parts skepticism and concern. She's used OR in all public communications, Alexander replied. The press has never gotten a clear photo. She's been strategic about her privacy. Well, Jerome gathered his papers, this certainly adds a dimension to our situation. As the board members filed out, muttering among themselves, Alexander sank back into his chair. The meeting room, once the nerve center of his empire, felt suddenly alien. Even the view of Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows, once a daily reminder of all he'd conquered, now seemed to mock him. The night he'd ended their marriage remained etched in Olivia's memory like acid on metal. She could still feel the cold granite of their kitchen island under her fingertips as she steadied herself against the shock of his words. This isn't working anymore, Alexander had said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he poured himself another glass of scotch. You and I both know it. She'd stared at him across their designer kitchen, struggling to process his words. What are you talking about? We just celebrated our anniversary last week. An anniversary I spent wishing I was somewhere else. He'd taken a sip, ice cubes clinking against crystal. With someone else. The floor had seemed to tilt beneath her. 6 years of marriage, of building a life together, and he'd delivered her sentence without even meeting her eyes. You can't mean that, she'd whispered. I've already spoken with my lawyer. The divorce papers will be ready tomorrow. Tomorrow? You've been planning this? His silence had been answer enough. What about all we've built together? I helped you create Hargrove Industries. I've been by your side through everything. He'd finally looked at her then, his expression almost bored. You were a supportive wife, Liv. That's what wives do. But the company is mine. It always has been. I gave up my career for you, she'd said, her voice breaking. I put my degree on hold. I sacrificed everything. And I'm compensating you fairly. The prenup. The prenup that your father insisted on. The one that gives me nothing if you decide to end things. A flash of something, guilt, perhaps, had crossed his face before disappearing behind that familiar mask of detachment. Business is business. And what about her? Olivia had asked, already knowing the answer. The late meetings. The weekend conferences. The way he'd stopped reaching for her in the night. Vanessa has nothing to do with this, he'd replied, but the slight flush of his neck had betrayed him. Vanessa Winters. His marketing director. 28, brilliant, and unencumbered by the messiness of wanting a family, something Olivia had been quietly hoping for. You have until the end of the week to move out, he'd continued, already turning away. I'd prefer to keep this civil. 3 days later, she'd stood in the rain outside there, his penthouse apartment, with 2 suitcases containing the remnants of her life. No access to their joint accounts. No equity in the home they'd shared. No severance from the company she'd helped build with her own sweat and tears and brilliance. Just a cashier's check for $20,000 that felt more like a final insult than a parting gift. For expenses until you get back on your feet, Alexander had said, as if he were doing her a favor. When the cab driver had asked where to, she'd had no answer. This memory, once so sharp it could draw blood, now felt distant as Olivia strode through the corridors of Phoenix Innovations. Her company. Her creation. Her redemption. That went well, remarked Elise Chen, her CFO, matching Olivia's brisk pace. Though I have to say, seeing the great Alexander Hargrove squirm was an unexpected bonus. We're not here for revenge, Elise, Olivia replied, though she couldn't quite suppress a small smile. The acquisition makes financial sense for both companies. Of course, Elise nodded, her expression turning serious. But it's still satisfying to see karma in action. Olivia slowed as they reached her office suite. Let's focus on the integration plan. I want detailed reports from every department head by tomorrow morning. If Hargrove accepts our offer on Friday, I want to hit the ground running. Already in progress, Elise assured her. We've been preparing for this acquisition for months. And speaking of preparation. She hesitated. Are you sure about meeting with him alone this afternoon? Olivia paused at her office door. It's just a meeting, Elise. With the man who threw you out with nothing, her CFO reminded her. The man who? The man who has no power over me anymore, Olivia finished firmly. I can handle Alexander Hargrove. As Elise departed, Olivia closed her office door behind her. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to lean against it, eyes closed, breath steadying. 7 years of preparation hadn't fully shielded her from the impact of seeing him again. Alexander Hargrove. Her first love. Her greatest betrayer. And now, her most significant acquisition target. The presentation continued around Alexander, financial projections and integration plans floating past him like debris in a storm. But he couldn't tear his eyes from Olivia. He'd been shocked when her name had appeared on the acquisition proposal. Phoenix Innovations had emerged seemingly overnight, a tech startup that had rapidly evolved into a market disruptor. Their proprietary software had revolutionized supply chain management, making them the darling of Silicon Valley in just 5 years. He'd admired their CEO from afar, a notoriously private woman known only as Or in press releases, who'd built something remarkable while maintaining an almost mythical anonymity. Never once had he imagined it might be her. Back in his office, Alexander loosened his tie and poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, not caring that it was barely past noon. The amber liquid reminded him of Olivia's eyes, once warm and inviting, now cold and penetrating. His phone buzzed with a message from his executive assistant. Board wants emergency meeting at 3 o'clock. Conference room B. Perfect. 2 hours for his board to dissect every weakness in his position before he met with Olivia at 5. He downed the scotch in one burning swallow. How had she done it? From nothing to a tech empire in 7 years. The Olivia he remembered had been brilliant, yes, but she'd been a strategist, not a coder. She'd understood people and markets, not algorithms and software architecture. And yet, Phoenix Innovations was built on revolutionary code. Supply chain management software so intuitive and effective it had transformed logistics worldwide. Companies willingly paid millions for access to their platform. Alexander pulled up an article on his tablet, one of the few featuring a photo of her, though her face was artfully obscured by shadow and angle. The accompanying text praised her visionary leadership and technical genius. The woman he dismissed as just a supportive wife had outpaced him in every conceivable way. His desk phone buzzed. Mr. Peterson is asking if you need more time before the board meeting, sir. Alexander straightened his tie. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. Time to face the music. The $20,000 hadn't lasted long. Not in Manhattan, where a decent apartment required first and last month's rent plus security deposit. Not when job interviews dried up after potential employers made discreet calls to Hargrove Industries. Olivia had eventually found a small studio in Brooklyn and a waitressing job that barely covered rent. Each night, she'd come home smelling of grease and defeat, wondering how she'd gone from corporate events and charity galas to serving burgers to impatient customers who didn't bother to look at her face. 3 months in, she'd hit rock bottom. Sitting on her mattress on the floor, surrounded by unpaid bills, she'd allowed herself one night of complete collapse. She'd cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes were swollen, until there was nothing left inside her but an empty, echoing space. And then, with the first pale light of dawn, something new had begun to take root in that emptiness. Not hope, exactly. Something harder. Colder. More durable. Determination. That morning, she'd withdrawn the remaining $212.46 from her account and bought a laptop from a pawn shop. She'd spent the next 2 weeks coding late into the night, fueled by convenience store coffee and the burning need to reclaim her life. The supply chain management algorithm had started as a project she'd proposed at Hargrove Industries, one Alexander had dismissed as too niche. But Olivia had seen the potential, the gap in the market that no one else was addressing. By month 6, she had a working prototype and a business plan. By month 8, she'd secured her first investor, a former client who remembered her from Hargrove and was willing to take a chance on her vision. Phoenix Innovations, named for the mythical bird reborn from ashes, had launched 11 months after Alexander had shown her the door. And now, 7 years later, she was worth more than he had ever been. If Olivia's journey from rock bottom to billion-dollar CEO speaks to you, hit that like button now. Have you ever had to completely reinvent yourself after a devastating setback? Share your story in the comments below, I read every single one. Her journey hadn't been straightforward, of course. Nothing worth building ever is. After securing her first investor, Martin Reeves, a former client from her Hargrove days who'd always valued her insights, Olivia had faced the daunting task of building a team with almost no resources. I can offer you equity instead of competitive salaries, she told her first recruits, and the promise that we're creating something revolutionary. Remarkably, people had believed her. Elise Chen had been first, a brilliant financial analyst who'd been passed over for promotion at her previous firm because she was too aggressive. Then came Darren Washington, a software engineer who'd grown disillusioned with the superficial applications his talents were being used for at a major tech company. I want to build something that actually matters, he told Olivia during their first meeting in a crowded coffee shop, the only office she could afford at the time. Together, they'd refined her algorithm, working out of a shared workspace that Phoenix could barely afford. 18-hour days blended into one another. Meals consisted of whatever was cheapest and could be eaten while coding. Sleep became a luxury none of them could afford. The first version of their platform had been buggy and limited, but it had shown enough promise to attract attention from smaller logistics companies desperate for an edge in an increasingly competitive market. It's not perfect, Olivia had admitted during their first client demo. But it will save you money from day one, and it will get better every week. She'd been right. Each client provided valuable feedback, and each iteration of the software improved dramatically. Within 2 years, Phoenix Innovations had moved from their shared workspace to a modest office in a converted warehouse. By year 3, they'd expanded to an entire floor in a midtown building. Year 5 had seen them purchase their own tower, a gleaming statement of success in the Manhattan skyline. And through it all, Olivia had maintained her privacy. No flashy interviews or magazine covers. No social media presence. Nothing that would alert Alexander or anyone from her past life to her meteoric rise. She'd wanted the work to speak for itself. And it had, loudly and clearly. At precisely 5 p.m., Alexander arrived at Olivia's office, having endured a punishing 2-hour board meeting where every possible alternative to Phoenix's offer had been explored and dismissed. The board's message had been clear: take the deal, or resign. Her assistant, a young man with a deliberately neutral expression, led him through a waiting area decorated with subtle elegance. No ostentatious displays of wealth here, just quiet, confident taste that spoke volumes. Alexander arrived at Olivia's office 10 minutes early, only to find her already waiting, reviewing documents at a sleek desk with the Manhattan skyline sprawling behind her. The Phoenix Innovations headquarters occupied the top floors of a gleaming tower in Midtown, a pointed statement about how high she had risen. "You've done well for yourself," he said, taking in the minimalist elegance of her space. "Yes." She didn't look up immediately. "I have." When she finally raised her eyes to meet his, Alexander felt the full weight of 7 years pressing between them. "Olivia," he began, "I know this is uncomfortable." "On the contrary," she interrupted. "I'm perfectly comfortable. You wanted to discuss business nuances. I've allocated 30 minutes. He sank into the chair across from her. "Is that all I get? 30 minutes after everything After everything you what, Alexander?" The first crack in her professional veneer appeared, a flash of something fierce beneath the surface. "After you discarded me like I was nothing. After you locked me out of the company I helped build. After you left me starting over at 34 with no home, no references, and a prenup that ensured I got nothing for 6 years of my life." Her words landed like physical blows. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "Mistakes." She laughed, a sound without humor. "Is that what we're calling it? Vanessa and I, it didn't last. 6 months after you left, she moved on to a venture capitalist with deeper pockets. And this concerns me how? I'm trying to explain that I was a fool." He leaned forward. "Liv, when I saw you walk into that boardroom today, I realized what I threw away." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "What happened to Hargrove Industries, Alexander? The company was thriving when I left." The abrupt change of subject left him momentarily speechless. "We expanded too quickly. The European market wasn't ready for our products. Then the recession hit, and we were overextended. And your leadership team? The same people who used to work with me. Most left after the second round of layoffs." She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "So now you need a lifeline, and Phoenix is offering one. That's why we're here. That's why the meeting was scheduled, yes. But seeing you again is irrelevant to the business at hand." She closed the folder in front of her. "Your company is in trouble. Mine isn't. I'm offering fair market value plus a 10% premium. Your shareholders will be relieved, your remaining employees will have job security, and you'll walk away with enough to start over. It's more than generous. And if I want more than just a business transaction? Her eyes narrowed. Such as? A chance, Liv. To apologize properly. To show you I've changed. For a moment, something flickered across her face, a shadow of the woman who had once loved him. But it vanished so quickly, he wondered if he'd imagined it. 7 years ago, she said quietly, I would have given anything to hear those words. I used to imagine you showing up at my door, realizing what you'd done, begging for forgiveness. Hope fluttered in his chest. But you know what I realized during those first awful months, she continued. That fantasy wasn't about you at all. It was about me still believing I needed your validation to be whole. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. I don't need that anymore, Alexander. I don't need you to recognize my worth. I built something from nothing, from less than nothing. I did that. Without your name, your connections, your money. He rose as well, desperate to keep her talking, to find some crack in her resolve. I'm not the same man who hurt you. Perhaps not. But I'm certainly not the same woman you hurt. She moved toward the door. The acquisition offer stands until Friday. After that, we'll be approaching your competitors. And us? Is there any chance? There is no us, Alexander. There's a seller and a buyer. A business transaction. Nothing more. As he walked to the elevator, defeat settling heavy in his stomach, Olivia called after him. For what it's worth, she said, I hope you find happiness. Just not with me. The elevator doors closed on Alexander's stricken face, and Olivia returned to her office, legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. She made it to her chair before the trembling began, a fine, almost imperceptible shaking that started in her hands and worked its way through her entire body. 7 years of imagining this moment, of rehearsing what she would say, how she would feel. None of it had prepared her for the reality of facing him again. She pressed a button on her desk phone. Elise, could you come in please? Moments later, her CFO appeared, concern evident on her face. How did it go? As expected, Olivia replied, striving for a neutrality she didn't feel. He attempted to make it personal. I redirected to business. Elise sat across from her, studying her carefully. And how are you really? The question hung in the air between them, between boss and employee, between friends who had weathered the worst together. Elise had been there during those early days, had seen the wreckage Alexander had left behind. Olivia began, then stopped, reconsidered. I thought I would feel triumphant. Vindicated. She looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Instead, I just feel tired. You don't owe him anything, Elise reminded her gently. Not your forgiveness, not your emotions, not even your anger. I know. Olivia turned back to her friend. But maybe I owe myself closure. That night, Olivia sat in her penthouse, a glass of wine untouched beside her as the city lights sparkled below. The meeting with Alexander had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She'd prepared for years for this moment, the culmination of a journey that had begun in humiliation and despair. She'd imagined his face when he realized who was buying his failing company. She'd rehearsed her cool, professional demeanor, the perfect revenge served at room temperature. What she hadn't anticipated was the hollowness of the victory. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus, her COO and closest friend, who had believed in her vision from the beginning. Deal on track. Need anything? She smiled. Marcus had been there through the all-nighters coding, through the rejections from skeptical investors, through the triumphant launch of their software. He'd seen her at her worst and championed her at her best. All good. Meeting again Friday, she replied. Another chime, he recognizes what he lost. Olivia stared at the message. Had Alexander recognized what he'd lost? The irony was that he still didn't understand. He saw the trappings of her success, the office, the company, the power. But he didn't see how she had rebuilt herself from the inside out. How losing everything had forced her to discover strengths she never knew she possessed. How each setback had hardened her resolve rather than breaking her spirit. How she'd learned to trust herself when there was no one else to rely on. "I think he's starting to," she typed back. Setting down her phone, Olivia walked to the window. Somewhere in this vast city was the shabby studio where she'd once cried herself to sleep. Somewhere was the diner where she'd served burgers with a smile while her mind worked through algorithmic problems. Somewhere was the coffee shop where she'd met her first investor, hands shaking as she pitched her idea. Each of those places had shaped her, forged her into the woman who now stood at the pinnacle of an industry. A woman who no longer needed Alexander Hargrove's approval or love. She picked up the acquisition contract, reviewing the terms one last time. Fair, but not generous. Reasonable, but not merciful. She'd made sure of that. Business was business, after all. As Olivia reviewed the contract, her mind drifted to the early days of her marriage to Alexander. They had met during their final year at business school. He the scion of a successful family business, she a scholarship student with ambition to match her intelligence. "You're the only person in this place who doesn't care about my last name," he told her on their third date, eyes bright with what seemed like genuine wonder. "I care about who you are, not what you're inheriting," she responded, meaning every word. They'd fallen in love quickly, deeply. Alexander had been different then, hungry to prove himself beyond his family legacy, passionate about innovation, and seemingly enchanted by Olivia's practical brilliance. After graduation, when he'd taken over a struggling division of Hargrove Industries, she'd been by his side, working as many hours as he did, contributing strategies and insights that helped transform the division into the company's most profitable arm. "We make an incredible team," he'd said on the night he proposed, exactly 1 year after they'd met. "Together, we could build an empire." And for a while, they had. She'd officially joined Hargrove Industries after their marriage, working her way up through legitimate promotions, though always in Alexander's shadow. His father, the formidable Henry Hargrove, had insisted on the prenuptial agreement, of course. "Just a formality," Alexander had assured her. "It protects the family assets, but it won't ever matter for us." 6 years later, she'd discovered exactly how much it mattered. The memory of their beginning only made the ending more bitter. More than once during those dark months after the divorce, Olivia had wondered if Alexander had ever truly loved her, or if she'd simply been a convenient partner, smart enough to be useful, attractive enough to be presentable, and naive enough to be controllable. She set down the contract with a sigh. Whatever they had once been to each other no longer mattered. All that remained was the business at hand. Across town, in his own penthouse, larger than hers but considerably less tasteful. Alexander poured his third scotch of the evening and tried to make sense of the day's events. His world had been upended not once but twice, first by the realization that his company was being acquired by Phoenix Innovations, and second by the discovery that Phoenix was Olivia's creation. Olivia. His live. Except she wasn't his anymore. Hadn't been for 7 years. And the woman he'd faced today bore little resemblance to the wife he'd discarded so carelessly. The scotch burned as he swallowed, a physical sensation to match the emotional burn of his regret. He had made so many mistakes, but none as catastrophic as the night he told Olivia their marriage was over. The truth, the shameful, humiliating truth, was that he'd been scared. Scared of the growing realization that she was the true visionary between them. Scared that his success relied too heavily on her insights. Scared that one day, everyone would see what he had begun to suspect, that he wasn't exceptional at all without her. Vanessa had been a distraction, yes, but also an escape. A relationship with no depth, no challenge, no potential to expose his insecurities. When she'd left him for a wealthier prospect, he'd been surprised but not heartbroken. No, his heart had broken later, in the slow, excruciating recognition that without Olivia, he was diminished in ways that extended far beyond business. The company had begun to struggle almost immediately after their divorce. Small missteps at first, a product launch that underperformed, a strategic partnership that yielded less than projected. Then larger failures, the European expansion she had cautioned against, the acquisition of a competitor that carried more debt than disclosed. With each setback, key team members had departed, often citing the changing culture at Hargrove. "It's not the same company anymore," one longtime executive had told him during his exit interview. "There's no heart here now." Alexander had dismissed such sentiments as emotional nonsense. Business wasn't about heart. It was about numbers, strategy, market dominance. But looking at the ruins of his once thriving enterprise, he had to wonder if they'd been right all along. If Olivia had been right. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo he'd never been able to delete. Their 5th anniversary, celebrated on a private beach in Maldives. Olivia laughing, head thrown back, sun glinting off her amber eyes, utterly carefree and beautiful. 1 year later, he'd thrown it all away. For what? Pride? Vanity? Fear? His phone buzzed with an incoming message from his attorney. "Board wants answer on Phoenix offer by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Delaying further weakens our position." Alexander set down his phone without responding. What was there to say? The company was failing. Phoenix's offer represented the best possible outcome for shareholders, for employees, for everyone. Everyone except him. If Alexander's story of devastating loss and regret resonates with you, hit the like button right now. Have you ever realized too late the value of what you threw away? What did you do about it? Share your experiences in the comments below. Our community is all about learning from each other's journeys. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day in Manhattan. Olivia arrived at Phoenix headquarters early, as was her custom. She preferred the quiet hours before the official workday began, time to center herself, review priorities, and prepare for whatever challenges awaited. Today's challenge was particularly significant, finalizing the acquisition strategy for Hargrove Industries, assuming Alexander and his board accepted their offer as expected. The integration would be complex, both technically and culturally. "Morning," called Marcus as he passed her open office door, 2 coffee cups in hand. He entered, setting one in front of her. "You're here even earlier than usual." "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Too many thoughts." Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, studying her with the familiar concern of a friend who had witnessed her worst moments. He had been employee number 5 at Phoenix, a brilliant systems architect who had left a cushy job at Google to join her fledgling startup. Over the years, he had become her most trusted confidant. "Second thoughts about Hargrove?" he asked. "No," Olivia replied immediately, then reconsidered. "Not about the acquisition itself. The business case is solid. It's just that it's not just business," Marcus finished for her. "It's personal too, whether you want it to be or not." She nodded, appreciating as always his ability to cut through to the heart of a matter. "Seeing him yesterday," she began slowly, "I realized something. I've spent 7 years building Phoenix partly to prove something to him. To show him exactly what he threw away. And now that you've done that, now I'm wondering what I'm really getting from this acquisition. Yes, Hargrove's patents complement our technology. Yes, their client base expands our market reach. But am I doing this for Phoenix, or am I doing it to complete some personal vendetta?" Marcus took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. "Maybe it's both. Maybe that's okay." "Is it?" Olivia challenged. "I've always prided myself on making rational business decisions, not emotional ones." "The best decisions are both," Marcus countered. "Rational in their execution, but driven by genuine passion. That's what makes Phoenix different from other tech companies. We have heart behind our algorithms." Olivia smiled despite herself. "When did you get so wise?" "Learn from the best," he replied with a grin. Now, do we move forward with Hargrove or not? Your call, boss. She took a deep breath, centering herself. We move forward. It's the right decision for Phoenix, regardless of my personal history with Alexander. Good. Marcus stood. Because their board just voted to accept our offer. Legal just got the notification. Olivia's eyes widened. When? About 20 minutes ago. Apparently, they held an early morning emergency session. He smiled. Congratulations, Liv. You just acquired the company that once threw you out. As Marcus left, Olivia sat back in her chair, an unexpected wave of emotions washing over her. This was victory, pure and simple. The ultimate professional redemption. So why did it feel so complicated? Across town, Alexander stood at his office window, watching the city come to life below. He had just presided over the most difficult board meeting of his career, the one where he had effectively signed away his family's company. The vote was unanimous, his assistant had informed him unnecessarily. He had seen the hands raised, and had counted each one himself. Not a single dissenter. Not even Jerome Peterson, his father's oldest friend and ally. It was the right decision, Alexander knew. Phoenix's offer was more than fair, especially given Hargrove's precarious financial position. The alternative, attempting to weather another year of losses while searching for another buyer or investment infusion, would likely end in bankruptcy and liquidation. This way, at least, the Hargrove name would continue on key product lines. Some employees would retain their jobs. Shareholders would recover a significant portion of their investment. All rational, sensible outcomes. And yet, watching the morning sun glint off neighboring skyscrapers, Alexander felt an acute sense of failure. His father had built Hargrove Industries from nothing, had weathered recessions and market shifts, had passed along a thriving enterprise to his only son. And Alexander had run it into the ground in just 7 years. The same 7 years that had seen Olivia rise from nothing to create one of the most innovative tech companies in America. The symmetry was not lost on him. His desk phone buzzed. Mr. Hargrove. Phoenix Innovations' legal team is on line 1. They'd like to schedule the signing ceremony for tomorrow morning. Alexander took a deep breath. Tell them that works. 10 a.m. Yes, sir. And, the board has called a press conference for 11. They've asked if you'll be making a statement. Of course they had. They wanted to control the narrative, to assure stakeholders that this acquisition was a positive development rather than a last-ditch effort to avoid bankruptcy. Tell them I'll be there, he replied, though the thought of facing cameras and reporters while standing next to Olivia made his stomach churn. One more humiliation in a day already overflowing with them. He returned to his desk and began the melancholy task of sorting through personal items. Family photos. Awards and mementos. Gifts from clients accumulated over years of business relationships. What did one take from the wreckage of a career? What was worth preserving? His hand paused over a small crystal paperweight, a gift from Olivia on the day Hargrove Industries had gone public. Embedded inside was a perfect miniature replica of the company's original logo, the one she had helped design. To remind you of where it all began, she had said, eyes shining with pride and love. No matter how big you get, never forget your foundations. He had forgotten. That was the problem. He had forgotten who had been instrumental in building Hargrove Industries into a success. He had forgotten the partnership that had made him better than he was alone. And now, the company was no longer his. Tomorrow, he will sign the papers transferring control to Phoenix Innovations. To Olivia. The universe, it seemed, had a particularly vivid sense of irony. Friday arrived with a sense of finality. Alexander had spent the week in desperate strategy sessions with what remained of his executive team, searching for alternatives to Olivia's offer. But the truth was inescapable, Phoenix Innovations was their only viable option. The board had made their position clear. Take the deal, or resign. As he entered the conference room for the final negotiation, Alexander felt oddly calm. The frantic scrambling of the past weeks had given way to acceptance. This was the end of one chapter and, perhaps, the beginning of another. Olivia was already seated, reviewing documents with her team. She looked up briefly as he entered, acknowledging him with a slight nod before returning to her work. "Good morning, everyone," he began, once all parties were settled. After careful consideration, Hargrove Industries has decided to accept Phoenix Innovations' acquisition offer, subject to the amendments our legal team has proposed. A ripple of satisfaction moved through Olivia's side of the table. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time that day. "We've reviewed your amendments," she said. "We can accept the extended timeline for department integration, but the valuation stands as originally offered." Alexander had expected this. "Then we have a deal." The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and handshakes. Documents exchanged hands, congratulations were offered with professional courtesy, and just like that, the company that bore his name no longer belonged to him. As the room emptied, Alexander remained seated, staring at the signed contract before him. He sensed rather than saw Olivia pause at the door. "Second thoughts?" she asked. He looked up, offering a rueful smile. "No. Just, processing." She hesitated, then returned to the table, taking a seat across from him. "It's never easy, letting go of something you've built. You would know." "Yes." She studied him, her expression softer than it had been all week. "For what it's worth, the Hargrove name will remain on the legacy products. Your father's original innovations deserve that recognition." The unexpected gesture caught him off guard. "Thank you. It's the right thing to do." She gathered her papers, preparing to leave again. "What will you do now?" "I'm not sure. Travel, maybe. Take some time to figure out what's next." He paused. "And you? Continuing your conquest of the business world?" A smile touched her lips. "Phoenix has a new healthcare initiative launching next quarter. It's meaningful work. You always wanted to make a difference. I remember you calling it naive. I was wrong about a lot of things." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and missed opportunities. "Olivia," Alexander finally said, "I know you don't want my apology, but I need to offer it anyway. What I did to you was unforgivable. I was selfish and blind and cruel. And seeing the woman you've become, the leader, the visionary, only highlights how catastrophically stupid I was to let you go." She listened without interrupting, her amber eyes giving nothing away. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I don't even expect friendship. But I want you to know that losing you was the beginning of losing everything else. Not because you were the foundation of my success, but because you were the best part of me. The part that knew what really mattered." She stood, smoothing her skirt in that familiar gesture he'd come to recognize. For a moment, he thought she might leave without responding. But then she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it, even after all this time." She gathered her belongings. "Goodbye, Alexander. Goodbye, Liv." He watched her walk away, straight-backed and confident, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The sound faded as she reached the elevator, and then she was gone. Alexander remained at the table, surrounded by the remnants of the empire he'd lost. But for the first time in years, the weight of failure felt lighter somehow. Perhaps because he'd finally acknowledged the greatest failure of all, and in doing so, had taken the first step toward redemption. Not with Olivia. That chapter was closed, the final page written in legal language and signed in permanent ink. But perhaps with himself. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows of the boardroom, washing away the past and clearing the way for whatever came next. If you've been moved by this story of redemption and second chances, take a moment to hit that like button. We all make mistakes in life, What truly matters is how we acknowledge them and grow from the experience. Keep watching to discover what happens after this pivotal moment between Olivia and Alexander. The press conference that followed was mercifully brief. Olivia delivered a polished statement about the strategic benefits of the acquisition, the plans for integrating key Hargrove technologies into Phoenix platforms, and the commitment to preserving jobs where possible. Alexander stood beside her, nodding at appropriate moments, offering a few prepared remarks of his own about the exciting new chapter for the company his father had built. If reporters noticed the tension between them, they were professional enough not to mention it directly. Only one dared to approach the personal connection, a veteran business journalist from the Wall Street Journal. "Ms. Reed, Mr. Hargrove, there are rumors that you two have a prior relationship. Would you care to comment on how that factored into this acquisition?" Olivia's smile remained perfectly in place. "Mr. Hargrove and I were briefly acquainted years ago. Today's transaction is based solely on business fundamentals and shareholder value. Phoenix Innovations has a track record of acquiring companies with complementary technologies, and Hargrove Industries fits our strategic roadmap perfectly." The reporter looked to Alexander, clearly hoping for a more revealing response. "Ms. Reed's assessment is correct," he replied evenly. "This acquisition makes sense for both companies. The personal history is irrelevant." A lie, of course. The personal history was anything but irrelevant. It colored everything about this transaction, from Olivia's initial interest in Hargrove Industries to the terms of the deal to the bittersweet satisfaction he saw briefly flash across her face as the papers were signed. But some truths weren't meant for press conferences. After the cameras stopped rolling and the journalists dispersed, Olivia turned to Alexander. "Your office has been packed up. Security will escort you out once you're ready." The words were professionally delivered, but he felt their sting nonetheless. This was really happening. 7 years after throwing her out of his life, she was now the one showing him the door. "Of course," he managed. "I just need a few minutes." She nodded, already turning toward her waiting team, already moving on to the next item on her agenda. Alexander watched her go, struck once again by the remarkable transformation. The Olivia he'd married had been brilliant and capable, yes, but this Olivia, this phoenix risen from the ashes he'd created, was something else entirely. A force of nature. A queen in the fullest sense of the word. And he'd been foolish enough to throw her away. The security guard assigned to escort him was respectfully silent as Alexander made his final walk through the headquarters of what had once been his family's legacy. Employees watched from behind cubicle walls and through glass-walled conference rooms, expressions ranging from sympathy to poorly disguised satisfaction. He'd not been a particularly beloved CEO, especially in these later years as the company struggled and layoffs became routine. At the elevator, he turned for one last look. The Hargrove Industries logo still dominated the lobby wall, but by Monday it would be gone, replaced by the rising phoenix that symbolized Olivia's triumph. "Ready, sir?" the guard asked. Alexander nodded. Ready or not, this chapter was ending. 6 weeks later, Olivia sat in her office, reviewing the integration progress reports. The acquisition of Hargrove Industries had proceeded more smoothly than anticipated. Key technical teams had merged without significant friction. Product roadmaps had been consolidated. Even the cultural differences between the companies were being addressed through thoughtful management and clear communication. By all objective measures, the acquisition was a success. Phoenix's stock price had climbed 15%. Industry analysts were praising the strategic fit. Clients were responding positively to the expanded capabilities. So why did Olivia feel so unsettled? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered, tablet in hand. "Got a minute?" "Of course." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "More good news about the integration." "Actually, something different." He sat, looking unusually hesitant. "I've been monitoring press coverage of the acquisition, and something interesting crossed my desk this morning." He passed her the tablet, open to a New York Times article. The headline made her breath catch: Former Tech CEO launches foundation for women in STEM. The accompanying photo showed Alexander at what appeared to be a small ceremony, cutting a ribbon outside a modest building. He looked different, his hair slightly longer, his usual tailored suit replaced by a more casual blazer and open collar. But it was his expression that struck her most. The arrogance she remembered had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility. She scanned the article quickly. Alexander had established a foundation using a significant portion of his personal wealth from the Phoenix acquisition. The organization would provide scholarships, mentoring, and seed funding for women pursuing careers in technology, with a particular focus on those facing economic disadvantages. The idea, he was quoted as saying, is to create opportunities for brilliant minds that might otherwise be overlooked or undervalued in traditional corporate environments. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from those who have had to overcome the greatest obstacles. Olivia set down the tablet, unsure how to process this information. This is unexpected. Marcus studied her carefully. The foundation's first grant went to a program at Brooklyn